Just 8 a.m. by my clock. In case there's any stragglers, I'll begin slowly here. But welcome to another Beyond Foam Rolling edition. My name is Brian. Come visit me down in the gym and spa downstairs at the club. We're going to try something. We're going to record today's session. We've had a couple of members ask if that's possible. So we're going to record this session and then we will upload it. It will be available at the Battery YouTube channel. So if we move a little quickly and you miss something and you want to go back and review it, or you caught it the first time and you just want to see it demonstrated again, or take the class again, it will be available on the Battery YouTube channel. Anyway, so we're going to work on our hip today. We're going to focus on the hip area. Let's check out a couple of equipment, pieces of equipment that we'll need. I always like to have your couch area handy here because we are going to use your couch as a mobility tool. If you've got a foam roller, you'll need that today. My other favorite mobility piece, the lacrosse ball, right? If you've never used a lacrosse ball before, they are becoming more and more ubiquitous mobility devices. Some substitutes today, if you don't have a lacrosse ball, again, wink, wink, you should get one. A baseball, or a tennis ball. A tennis ball is a little less desirable because a tennis ball's got a little bit of squish and give to it. A lacrosse ball is nice and a little more firm rubber. So that's going to be a little more effective at getting at some of those deeper trigger points that we're going to be using. So lacrosse ball. If you have a yoga block, I just happen to have a small book here. Because I don't own a yoga block here. I need to fix that. But if you've got a yoga block, grab that. Otherwise, a book about this size will be good. We'll need that. And then if you have an exercise band, this one is light to medium intensity. A little bit plus or minus on either side will be fine if your band is a little bit different thickness. And then if you can see, I've anchored it to a fixed object there. So I can pull on it a bit here, right? It will provide some resistance. So we'll need to be able to fix it to something. And mine is about, as you can see, about the height of my couch. That's about where we'd like to fix it to. Something that's about hip height if you're kneeling on the ground, right? So mine's not quite perfect. Mine's about waist height, but we work with what we've got. So that's the equipment that we'll need. I will just kind of continue to talk a little bit while some of you gather those pieces of equipment. Again, foam roller, lacrosse ball, yoga block or a small book, and a band, and we'll need to fix that to an object. Also, if you have any cushions too for your knees, you'll see why we need those. Couch cushion would probably be fine. I've got this flashy little cushion. I've also got a second cushion that goes with it, will match. You only need one. I've got my yoga mat down on the floor here for a little added comfort because I've got some hard floors. And then of course, your final and biggest mobility tool will be your couch itself. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pull up our first exercise. This one will probably be one that you're all familiar with. We're just going to start with the foam roller. And we're working on the hips today. I'm going to work on the upper part of the hips here, kind of these hip flexors that are closer to our hip. Technically, yes, your quads are hip flexors because they do help flex the hip, which is what I'm doing right here. We're going to focus on the upper region here, primarily a muscle that's abbreviated our TFL. It's our tensor fascia latae. You don't have to memorize anything. There's not going to be a quiz, but we're going to focus on this area right about here. It would be the area that if you were standing and you were to bunch up your pants right here, right? Or maybe the area right where you were about to slip your hands into your pockets this is where your TFL is. So you'll notice it's not right in front. It's a little bit to the side. Right here is this meaty area. And if this becomes tight, or as we say overactive, it can be difficult to stand up all the way, to extend the hip. This is extending the hip. This is flexing the hip. It can be difficult to extend the hip. If this muscle is tight, if you can imagine here, I kind of run into a block right here. Now, a lot of times my body will compensate by arching my back, right? So now I feel like I'm standing up nice and tall, but in reality, I've got a kink in the system here. And in order to make up for it, I put another kink in the system here. It can lead to low back pain, difficulty, things like that. So that's kind of the problem area that we're going to address today. So since we've got our foam roller, let's go ahead and start there. And since the TFL is slightly to the side, I can't lie flat on the foam roller here, even if I had a larger one. This one obviously isn't quite wide enough for my body, so I'm kind of doing one leg at a time here. But I want to be here and slightly to the outside. So I've got the foam roller on the ground, hip here, and for me, I'm going to bias my body out this way, right? So the foam roller is just kind of biased towards the outside of my hip. And I always like to start with what I call, if you've taken my class before, you've heard me kind of break it down this way. These long rolls on the foam roller, it's kind of the equivalent of Swedish massage, right? Swedish massage is a good way to kind of warm up or relax the muscles, but not so great to get into some of those trigger points, those deep tissue. So we're going to gradually go from Swedish techniques that mimic Swedish massage to techniques that mirror more of a deep tissue. So again, we'll just kind of start with some gentle warming up here of the tissues. And I'm just kind of going up and down the length of the muscle. It's a short muscle, right? You'll notice that I don't have to go very far down the leg. I'm kind of staying right up here at the hip attachment region. You'll notice that in each of the techniques and exercises that we're going to do today, we're going to move through them fairly quickly. Our class is 50 minutes today, and I don't recommend that you do mobility exercises for 50 minutes. It's just a little too much of a big dose all at once. Better to do small therapeutic doses regularly rather than kind of cram it all into one big session. So today's class is more like a grab bag of mobility exercises. Some of them you will like and find effective. Others, maybe not as much. That's okay. I want you to pick and choose some of the mobility drills that we do today. I'm going to switch to the other leg here. I want you to pick and choose and then do your mobility exercises for only about 15 minutes each day. 15 minutes, that's kind of the cap. I want you to cap it at that. I'd rather have you do, say, 3 days where you do 15 minutes of mobility than one day where you try to cram 45 minutes into one helping. It just won't be as effective. And for each individual exercise on this foam roller here, my minimum therapeutic dose recommendation, 2 to 3 minutes, right? Any less than 2 minutes, you won't start to elicit some of the tissue changes. More than 3 minutes, you could go to maybe 4 minutes, but kind of beyond that, I recommend that you just kind of move on to a different one rather than just doing, say, 15 minutes of foam rolling, especially on the same muscle. You're probably gonna leave yourself feeling a little bit beat up. All right, so if going the length of the muscle as I've been here is kind of the Swedish technique, let's go into something that's a little more on the deep tissue spectrum, not quite as intense deep tissue, but here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go back to my first leg. And now I'm going to do what I call cross fibering. You can kind of see what I'm doing now. The foam roller is in one place. And now I'm rotating the muscle over the top of the foam roller. And now the foam roller is orientated perpendicular to the direction of the muscle fiber. And so this allows me to be a little more concentrated rather than sweeping over the entire area. Now I can be a little more targeted. Now, when I find one of those sensitive spots, what we call trigger points, I want to lean into that and really maybe kind of just do some gentle cross fibering on top of that. Once I've cross fibered in a certain section, then I can move the foam roller to a slightly different part of the muscle, maybe up or down, and then continue that cross fibering motion. And again, if you find one of those tender spots, don't shy away from it. You want to lean into that a bit. You can even just kind of hold or pause there for a second. Don't forget to breathe, right? Don't hold your breath. It's like what your massage therapist says when they find a good knot or a tight spot, they encourage you to breathe, right? We want to do the same thing because we're trying to access that parasympathetic nervous system, the rest, digest element of our nervous system. So in order to get that trigger point, that tight part of the muscle to relax, right? We want to also be relaxed in our breathing. I'm going to move over to the other leg. Again, we're just doing that cross fibering. If I find a good, happy trigger point, I just kind of want to lean into it, really put my weight down on the foam roller. You notice something happens after about 30 seconds to that especially nasty trigger point. It starts to give a little bit, and that's a good thing. Back to a little cross fibering. Again, minimum therapeutic dose here, 2 to 3 minutes. I'm going to abbreviate all of that here. So I know I've probably been on this leg here for about 60 seconds or so. I'll cut my own duration short here, just in the interest of moving through all the material that we're going to cover today. Because again, today is more about introducing you to a grab bag of different mobility techniques and exercises, and then you will get to pick and choose as you design your own mobility exercise program to be done in about 15 minutes each day. All right. Enough Swedish. We're going to put the foam roller for a side and grab our lacrosse ball. This one really is the deep tissue massage therapist. We're going to target that same area, right? Ball on the ground. My weight goes on top of it. And already I can feel the transition to some of that deep tissue work here. Again, I'm hunting around, I'm moving my hips on top of the ball, hunting around until that lacrosse ball lands on one of those knots, those trigger points, those really sensitive areas. And that's where I want to kind of lean into. Don't forget to breathe. And then hang out on that trigger point for a good 30 seconds. And once you've been on it for 30 seconds, I'm gonna start moving around, hunting around for the next nasty spot. you'll really be able to feel the difference in pressure and effectiveness between foam roller and this lacrosse ball. Again, I'm going to move on to the next one here, but I recommend at least 2 to 3 minutes here. I'm going to move on to the other leg. You can move on as well. You've just kind of sampled the lacrosse ball on one side. Move it over to the other side, sample it over there. You may find one side is a little more gristly than the other. That's okay. That's normal. Most people are not perfectly even from side to side. We develop muscle imbalances, tightness, particularly after an injury. Maybe you injure one leg, maybe you twist your ankle, tweak your knee a little bit. Your body will respond to that by altering your movement mechanics in order to take care of that injury, to compensate for it. If we don't properly rehabilitate our bodies and restore those natural, normal movement patterns after an injury, those altered movement mechanics can become, can continue to influence the way we move even after the injury has healed. Right, to put it, I guess, in simple terms, if you limp after an injury in order to take care of an injured leg, once the leg is no longer injured, you need to affirmatively try to remove that limp from your gait. If you don't, some of that residual limping pattern will still be in your body, and it'll probably be so subtle that you don't notice. So what you need to do is rehabilitate, in this example, your walking gait. And part of that can look like exactly what we're doing right now. Looking for muscle imbalances on one side of the body versus the other, and starting to smooth those imbalances out. All right, we've worked on the lacrosse ball here on both sides. One last inhibitory technique here. I want you to grab that yoga block. For me, it's this book. And I'm going to elevate my hips. So I'm going to take my cushion, my yoga block, my book, stack it on top, and finally, lacrosse ball, right? So cushion, yoga block, lacrosse ball. I'm going to go back to work on that hip. I'm going to go back to work on this hip so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. So now what I've done is elevated the hip that I'm working on. I've dug this lacrosse ball back into that TFL, and here's what I'm going to add. On this leg that's being worked on, I'm going to squeeze my glute, lift my leg off the floor. Boom. I find that nasty trigger point with the lacrosse ball, squeeze the glute, lift the leg off the floor. We'll do a few more repetitions here, and then I'll explain what the heck we're doing right here. Do about 10 to 15 reps. Then I'll have you guys switch legs while I explain the effectiveness of this exercise. That feels like it's about 10. We'll say that's 11. So that's 12. I'll do 3 more here. 13, 14. Really squeezing my glute up there at the top. And that's 15. You go ahead and switch legs while I explain why this is effective. So your body has a principle called reciprocal inhibition. Again, no quiz. You don't have to remember the fancy language, but remember the concept. my glute and my hip flexors, in this case my TFL, work opposite one another, right? When one muscle contracts, the other one relaxes, right? I have to relax my glute in order to contract my hip. Opposite's true too. When my glute flexes, my hip flexor has to stretch, lengthen, relax, right? So if the goal here is to relax our TFL, right? We've been doing self-massage with all these tools. One way I can also help it relax is by flexing the muscle on the other side of the joint. In this case, that's my glute, right? So I've got kind of a 2-for-1 going on here, right? I'm working on relaxing the muscle with this self-massage tool, and I'm squeezing my glute, right? That will send the neuromuscular signal to this muscle to relax, right? Inhibit. So I activate here on one side while I'm inhibiting on the other side, right? So keep working, about 10 to 15 reps on each side as you're digging that lacrosse ball into the TFL, squeezing your glute, which should extend the hip, lifting the leg up off the ground. Be careful not to put the work in your low back, right? If you're doing this and you're thinking, wow, I don't really feel anything in my glute, but my low back sure is getting smoked, chances are that's a compensation, right? The small of your back, the muscles in your low back are pulling to extend the hip when it really should be your glute that's doing the work, right? So develop that mind-muscle connection. Really be thoughtful about what muscle are you squeezing in order to get this exercise done. All right, my guess is you've probably done your 10 to 15 reps. Let's go ahead and move on to the next exercise. All right, this one is one of my favorites, especially for those folks that sit all day. I'm going to take this other cushion and put it at the base of my couch. We're going to use the couch as our main mobility tool here. And we call this creatively the couch stretch. So what I'm going to do is take my knee on the leg that I'm working on. I'm going to work on my right leg first here. I'm going to take this knee that I'm working on and I'm going to put it as close to the base of the couch as I can, right? Back here, my foot is just relaxed up here at the top of the couch. And now, depending on how tight you may particularly be, you may want to start here in this position with the other leg down too as well. Sometimes if you have something to kind of help prop you up, this can be a little easier to accomplish. I'll just use this foam roller right here. But I want to kind of come up to this position. Again, if you're having trouble balancing, foam roller right there, maybe even a broom handle, something like that to kind of help prop you up. But I want to try to come up into this position. Again, keeping my knee close to the base of the couch. And if I'm in a good position here, I should feel a stretch in that TFL region, right? I'm going to come up here and try not to overarch the back. Let me show you this from the side. Move my couch over here. Excuse me, move my cushion over there. I'm going to take this knee that I'm working on, put it as close to the base of the couch as I can. I don't want to put it away from the couch because then I won't feel as much of a stretch here. It won't put my leg in enough of a good position. Now, if you feel already tight, this might be just leave this knee down. This is the position that you're going to be in. A nice straight line between your shoulder, hip, and knee. I don't want to arch my back just so that I can say, hey, coach, I'm upright, right? Am I doing it right? Because then I'm just going to stress my low back. So for those of you that are especially tight in your hip flexor, you can stay leaned down in this direction, right? Straight line between the shoulder, hip, and knee. If you're a little more flexible, you can start to make your way up. This is my tighter leg. And once you feel like you're in a good balanced position here, I want you to squeeze the glute on the leg that you're working on. If I squeeze this glute, it's going to drive this hip forward. And we've already talked about reciprocal inhibition, so we know the added benefit. We're giving a stretch here while we activate the muscle on the other side of the joint. You'll notice that when you squeeze this glute, it really lights up the front of your leg. That's a good thing. So some glute contraction, we're getting some activation back here while we're getting a stretch. If you are especially limber and you want a little more intensity, what I can do is prop this other leg up. So now I'm a little more upright. Again, still straight line between your shoulder, hip, and knee, right? I don't want to just kind of be arching for arching's sake. So this leg is planted, got a lot of flex in this knee, squeezing the glute, driving this hip forward. This is one of my favorite mobility exercises. It's especially good for those that sit at a desk all day, right, with a constantly flexed hip like this. We need to do some work on our bodies to sort of restore the ability to extend, to fully extend the hip. And this is a terrific mobility exercise for you. I'm going to switch to the other leg here, and I'll orientate this way. Again, minimum therapeutic dose, especially for the couch stretch. 2 to 3 minutes. I err on the side of going a little bit longer, so closer to 3 minutes per side is better than 2. There we go. This is the side I can show off on a little bit. A little more flexible here than I am here, which goes to show, yeah, I do this for a living. Even I have some imbalances side to side. So totally normal. And I'm squeezing this glute, pressing the hip forward. Feeling a good stretch right up here at the top of my leg. In about another 30 seconds here, then I'm going to show you a little variation that you can do. We're going to use that band. All right, let me show you a little bit of a different variation here. Again, I've got my cushion for a little knee comfort. Try to show you on this leg, the leg closest to the camera. So I'm going to take this band. I'm going to put it around the hip, the leg that I'm working on, right? So that the band is pulling my hip open, right? So I'm working on my left leg. I'm going to step back so there's a little bit of tension on the band, carefully, obviously. And then I'm going to drop that same knee down to the floor. Put a little more tension on this band. There we go. So now I'm just kneeling, and I've got that band right underneath my glute because I want it kind of high on my hip, on my femur here, my thigh bone. I want it close to the head, that hip, the hip socket. So I want it as close to the proximal head of my femur as I can. Got some tension on the band. So the band is pulling the hip, the head of the femur towards the front of the socket. Now I'm just going to do that same thing I was doing. Squeeze the glute, drive the hip forward. Squeeze the glute, drive the hip forward. A little variation on the couch stretch. This one you may feel is a little less intense than the couch stretch. That's okay. Choose a variation, banded or unbanded. It kind of matches with your tolerance for the intensity level. Again, 2 to 3 minutes per side. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the other leg, even though it's only been about a minute there. Again, we're just sampling exercises today. And squeeze the glute. on the kneeling leg. And let that band do its thing, pulling my hip open in this direction. And another 10 seconds here. Again, don't forget my minimum therapeutic dose for these drills, 2 to 3 minutes. I know we're moving kind of quickly, so I'm favoring showing you guys a lot of different exercises, giving you guys a lot of things to choose from in designing your own mobility practice. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, one more hip stretch I'm going to show you. This one I'm just going to kind of need my yoga mat here, or if you've got hardwood floors here, maybe a yoga mat plus a cushion. I'm going to put myself into the beginning of what looks like a pigeon pose or pigeon stretch, right? So with my knee bent underneath my body and this leg kind of rotated out this way. And I'm going to take this leg, I'm going to go back and across. And then come up, back and across. Hold for a few seconds. And then come up, back and across. So I'm hooking my leg behind me. You'll notice that I get a great stretch on the glute and hip of this leg that's tucked underneath me. Back and across. Now, some of you may have a professional pigeon back there. You will go much farther and deeper than I am. That's okay. As long as you don't put yourself on video and show me up on the class. Kidding. So again, back and across. Drop that leg down. Ideally, if you're doing these as repetitions as I am here, see if you can sink maybe just a centimeter or two deeper on each repetition. Back and across. About 10 reps on each side. I'm going to go ahead and switch to my other leg. I feel like I did about 10 there. Again, start of a pigeon pose here. Drop the leg back and across. You should feel a good stretch in this entire glute region right here. Some of you, if you've got a little bit of a hip impingement, you may feel it tight up here. That's okay too. We all kind of have individual circumstances of soft tissue restriction. Back and across. Each time trying to lean a little bit more into it. Back and across. I like this active version better than just kind of doing it once and then just kind of sitting here all day. Not that that's incorrect, but I like this sort of active working of our soft tissues because I always liken it to if you try to break a paper clip, right? You know, soft aluminum paper clip, you don't just apply static pressure one time in one direction. You kind of work it back and forth, bend, 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 bend. The material will start to soften. That's kind of what we're trying to get our soft tissues to do here, right? So these repetitions of leaning into a stretch, then release, is akin to kind of that movement of the paperclip, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, in order to try to elicit some of that more suppleization of your tissues. I'm going About 10 reps here. If that's not quite 10, we'll just call it 10. Good. All right. Okay, so now that we've done a little bit of inhibition and lengthening exercises, let's do some activation of the glutes, which is on the other side of the hip, as we talked about earlier, right? So if we spend a lot of time in a seated position, our glutes are lengthened, right? Lengthened, and they're relaxed, they're shut off. So let's try to turn them on a little bit. Here, I'm just gonna lie down on my yoga mat. I like this little extra cushion for some comfort. And remember what we were doing on the yoga ball, or excuse me, the yoga block plus the lacrosse ball, what I meant to say. We're gonna do that single leg glute activation again. Squeeze and lift the leg. You can do 2 at once. That's okay too. Maybe if you're a little pressed for time, want to do about 10 to 15 reps here. Again, try to keep the work out of your low back. So don't prop yourself up too high like this, because now already my low back is in an overextended position. So we're going to come down here to the floor. I've got to keep my head up a little bit so I can talk to you. But if you want to lay all the way down on the floor, that's fine. 2 legs, lifting off the floor. I'm not really curling my knees, right? It's just a function of, there's a little bit of a soft bend in my knee. But if you're looking at my knee and thinking I'm doing any kind of active curl with my leg, I'm not. The work here is in my glutes. And about 10 to 15 reps there. And anytime you do these activation exercises, kind of the general rule, 3 separate sets of 10 to 15 reps. So I would do, say, 15 reps, rest for maybe 30 seconds, and then do another set of 15 reps, rest for about 30 seconds, and then do another set of 15 reps. And 15 is kind of the 10 to 15 is kind of the minimum. If you go as high as 20 or 25 reps, if you're feeling a little more advanced here, that's totally fine. I just kind of deal in minimum therapeutic doses for you guys, so you guys know at least what you have to at least do in order to get some of the benefits of these exercises. All right, next one. We're going to go back to this band. Now, so a little quick explainer for what we're going to do on this next one. So if I'm going to kneel on one leg, plant the other leg here, and I want to be in a position where I can have some tension on this band. I'm going to hold the band in my hand, and I'm going to hold it in the opposite hand of the knee that's down. So my left knee is on the ground. I'm going to hold the band in my right hand. I'm going to put a little more tension on this band. And what I'm going to do is, as I squeeze this glute, I'm going to keep this arm straight, pull it down. Let me show you on the other side so you can see what I'm doing with my arm. So I'm switching sides here. If my right knee is on the ground, the band is in my left hand. I'm going to squeeze my left glute back here, driving that hip forward as I do this. Pulling the arm down. What I'm doing is I'm activating my lat on this side as I activate my glute on the opposite side. Now, why the heck am I doing that? Well, your body works contralaterally. Another vocabulary word that you don't need to remember, but you do need to know the concept, right? It's like when we walk, right? If I'm walking correctly, when my leg goes forward, the opposite arm swings, right? This is just how we naturally walk. There's a word called ipsilaterally, and it would look really silly if we walk this way, right? That's ipsilateral movement. Contralateral is the casual movement of one side opposite the other. And we do that to counterbalance our weight, right? So in that natural walking motion, this movement here is in part activated by my lats on this side. So you'll notice that when I walk, my lat is activated on one side, while my glute is activated on the other as I drive this way, right? So I drive here, the hip opens, this glute is activated as this arm swings backwards, right? So right lat works with left glute, right glute works with left lat. So that's essentially what I'm doing here. I'm working on my left glute. So I'm also going to work my right side lat. And that is the explanation for this exercise. So I'm working my left glute. I'm coordinating that movement with my right lat, getting them to fire together. Maybe help restore perhaps some missing function. Again, about 10 to 15 reps per side, right? 3 sets. In fact, you can do 10 to 15 reps here, then switch sides. 10 to 15 reps. And so if I do 10 to 15 on one side, then 10 to 15 on the other, that constitutes having done 1 set on each side. I'll rinse and repeat 2 more cycles. All right, pull and squeeze. Pull back here and squeeze. And we'll say that's 10 to 15 reps there. And let's move on to the next one. Similar activation drill. If you've done a bird dog, you've probably seen this exercise before. What I want to do is get in this quadruped position, and I want to find the neutral center between, if you do yoga, cat, cow, right? So this would be cat, this would be cow. I want to find neutral between there, and then I want to squeeze my abs, lock it down here. So when I do this exercise, there is no movement in my spine whatsoever. I find that neutral position. And I'm going to extend one leg, right? Squeeze the glute here while I row with the other side, right? This toe is off the ground. And it kind of mimics some of the same muscle activation that we just did in the last drill. Activating contralaterally, one glute and the opposite lat. Now you notice when I'm extending the leg, I'm not doing a big sweep, right? Because when I do this, what happens to my spine, right? It flexes, or excuse me, it extends, right? I don't want that, and it probably flexes here too, right? So when I'm doing this, what I think about doing is taking the heel and just pressing back with it until I feel the glute stretch, right? Just take the foot and push something back, right? Push backwards. You'll notice that will avoid that big sweeping movement. And again, I'm just rowing with this one, so I drive the heel back and row. Let me show you on this side. So I drive the leg back and row. Drive back and row. If you have a really light dumbbell, 5 or a 10-pound dumbbell, feel free to add that, but you don't need to, right? Empty hand is okay. Because this is more about getting those opposite muscle groups to fire while maintaining core stability, right? So I'm creating movement at my primary engines, that is my shoulder complex and my hip complex, right? Those are my primary moving engines, while my chassis stays locked and fixed in one place, right? Again, 10 to 15 reps. I'll abbreviate this just a little bit here so we can get to one of our last exercises for the day. Good work. All right, so this is a little bit of an integration exercise, which means we're taking these new adjusted soft tissues, right? We've inhibited the overactive hip flexors. We've activated the muscles, the glutes on the other side of the hip. So let's do a movement that kind of puts all of them together. And so here's what we're going to do. This time I've got the kneeling leg down, so my right knee is on the floor. And now I've got the band in my right hand. So a little opposite from what we were doing. Last time we had right knee down, band in left hand. This time we're going to move it over to the right, because actually the leg that we're going to be working on right now is the one that's planted. So what I'm going to do is stand and row as I bring the leg up here. I would love a little bit more room here, but so I can have some more tension on the band, but we work with the space that we've got, right? So I'm going to come drive up to standing and row. Down and row. Down and row. Down and row. So you'll notice what I'm doing is, as I'm extending this glute, I'm pulling here, right? And this arm naturally just kind of swings forward because that's that contralateral movement, right? So without the band here, just so I can demonstrate it, drive and pull. Go down, drive and pull. Go down, drive and pull. Try a few reps on one side. And we'll go ahead and switch sides. So again, left knee is down, band is in the left hand. I'm going to stand up with this leg as I pull. And that is the risk of having unstable furniture in the house. Anyway, continuing to demonstrate. So I've got the imaginary band in my hand, pull. And pull. And pull. There we go, team. All right, good work today. Notwithstanding the furniture mishap there at the very end. All right, so that is some mobility work for our hip complex. Again, my recommendation, no more than 15 minutes of work each day. The class today was all about giving you guys a grab bag of exercises. Some of them you will like, some of them didn't feel as effective, and that's okay. Pick and choose the ones that you like. Do the time domain or the rep scheme that I described, and a lot about just no more than 15 minutes a day for your mobility exercises, and do that frequently, right? If we only do 15 minutes a week, we're not going to see a lot of difference in our posture or range of motion, which is obviously the goal.